Blood dripped onto the thick carpet, seeping into the luxurious fibers of the first-class cabin. Dr. Malik Carter, dressed in an elegant ash-gray suit, was dragged like a criminal under the stunned eyes of dozens of passengers holding up their phones to record every second. Just minutes earlier, he had been welcomed as a diamond passenger. Now he was being forced out of seat 1A, all because he had said a simple sentence: "This is my seat." In that moment, the cabin air froze. No one could believe that a man so impeccably dressed, with calm eyes and polished manners, could suddenly become the center of such a violent confrontation. But Malik knew better. This was not the first time he had been forced to prove that he deserved to sit in the place he had paid for. Malik Carter was born in South Chicago, where dark alleys and ambulance sirens never slept. His father had been wrongfully convicted, spending 10 years in prison for a crime he did not commit. His mother, a thin woman with calloused hands, worked 3 jobs to keep their crumbling apartment from being seized by the bank. It was in those fractured childhood years that Malik learned 2 truths etched deep into his being. Education was the only ticket out, and the system was never designed to favor people with skin like his. By 16, Malik had turned himself into a programming prodigy. In a community room filled with old computers, he spent night after night until the guard forced him out. The clumsy lines of code he first wrote became algorithms so advanced they convinced teachers he was a phenomenon. That talent carried him to MIT on a full scholarship. He graduated with dual degrees in computer science and business, the applause thunderous like a storm. But when he stepped into the real world, the applause fell silent. 20. 7 interviews. 20. 7 rejections. The reason sounded reasonable. Not enough experience. Not the right cultural fit. But Malik always saw the fleeting look in their eyes, the surprise when he walked into the room. No one admitted it outright, but he understood. The problem was never his resume. It was his skin. In the end, he chose his own path. From his cramped apartment, Malik founded Aegis Shield, a cybersecurity company built with the small inheritance from his grandmother. He had no office, no team, only an old laptop and a hunger to prove himself against a world filled with doubt. Then came the moment that changed everything. A Fortune 500 corporation was under a massive cyber attack that no one could stop. Aegis Shield accomplished the impossible, shutting down the intrusion in just hours. From that moment, Malik was no longer an outsider. He became the gatekeeper of an entire industry. 3 years later, Aegis Shield had grown into a billion-dollar enterprise, defending the data systems of banks, hospitals, even governments. Magazines hailed him as the Guardian, the man who built firewalls not only with code, but with a belief that technology could protect those who had always been abandoned. At 38, Malik had reached heights he never dared to dream of as a boy. But on that fateful flight, surrounded by leather seats and sparkling champagne, he faced a familiar battle, proving that he belonged there. Walking through security at O'Hare, Malik remained calm. A tailored suit, Italian briefcase, platinum credit card, everything signaled he was a high-tier traveler. Yet the TSA agent still pointed directly at him. "Sir, additional screening." He smiled, removed his laptop, and let them search, while a white businessman behind him carrying 3 electronic devices walked through unquestioned. At the first-class check in counter, the attendant glanced at him and gestured toward the economy line. "Economy is over there, sir." Only when he presented his diamond membership card did she snap to attention, correcting her tone, though she still avoided his eyes. Malik said nothing. He was used to that look, used to the fleeting doubt that cut like a cold blade and left scars deeper than it seemed. He simply smiled, nodded, and entered the diamond lounge, knowing that even there he would be treated like an intruder. And he was right. When the staff scanned his membership card, her smile faltered for half a second. A needless question slipped out. "First time in our lounge, Dr. Carter?" Malik handed over his documents. While she scrutinized them, he noticed other guests, all middle-aged white men, casting glances at him as if he had just broken an unspoken rule. Malik sat quietly in the corner, opening his laptop to prepare for his important meeting in New York. He did not yet know that just hours later, his name would flood the headlines, not as the guardian of cybersecurity, but as the black man dragged from seat 1A. Out there, people still believed power was money, titles, and thunderous applause. But for Malik Carter, real power was sometimes nothing more than holding onto his seat in a world that never stopped trying to make him stand up. The Boeing 787 gleamed like a flying palace. Malik Carter stepped into the first-class cabin, his ticket printed clearly. Seat 1A, the best spot by the window, with wide legroom and no one seated in front. He placed his leather briefcase overhead, adjusted his tie, and prepared to let his mind settle before an important meeting. A glass of champagne was set on the small table. Sophie Kramer, the lead flight attendant, smiled with professional polish. "Welcome, Mr. Carter. We are honored to serve you today." Malik returned a faint smile, but he noticed how her eyes flicked briefly over his luxury watch and Italian shoes before she turned away. The look was not openly hostile, but it carried an undercurrent of doubt, as though she needed to verify whether he truly belonged here. The cabin door opened. A middle-aged man entered, hair streaked with gray but unkempt, his suit wrinkled, his breath heavy with alcohol, moving with the swagger of someone convinced the world revolved around him. Graham Whitfield. He stopped right beside Malik's seat, his brow furrowing. "There's been a mistake. This seat is mine. I always sit in 1A. Malik looked up, his voice calm. "I'm sorry, but this is my seat. The ticket is clear, you can check." Graham did not even glance at it. He turned to Sophie, his tone commanding. "Check again. I've flown this route for 15 years. I always sit in 1A. Sophie leaned down and carefully took Malik's ticket. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she verified it. "Yes, Mr. Carter. Your ticket is entirely correct. You are assigned to seat 1A. She turned to Graham. "Mr. Whitfield, your seat is 2C, just behind." A beat of silence, then Graham's face flushed red. "I'm claustrophobic. I cannot sit in an aisle seat. He can switch with me." His tone carried the weight of entitlement, as if Malik were just an inconvenience blocking the way for a real frequent flyer. Sophie's smile tightened, and she turned back to Malik. "Mr. Carter, perhaps you could consider it. This is a long flight, and Mr. Whitfield is one of our regulars." Around the cabin, other passengers began to take notice. Malik could feel the eyes on him, half curious, half expecting him to yield. He drew a deep breath, his words calm but resolute. "I chose this seat for a very specific reason. I need the space to prepare for an important meeting. I will remain in seat 1A. Sophie's smile froze. Graham snorted, muttering loud enough for everyone to hear. Ridiculous. Someone like this sitting in my seat. Those words, someone like this, echoed inside Malik's mind. He had heard them before, in job interviews, at the bank counter, in boardrooms where he was the only one with dark skin. And now, even as a billionaire CEO, a diamond tier member, he was forced to face the same familiar refrain. "You do not belong." Malik locked his eyes on Graham, his voice low but unyielding. "Seat 1A is mine, and I will sit here." In that moment, the entire first-class cabin fell silent. The sound of luggage shifting, the whispers all stopped. The atmosphere tightened like a drawn string. Sophie hesitated, then turned away to prepare for takeoff. Malik closed his eyes, forcing his heartbeat to steady. But deep inside, he knew the real turbulence had only just begun. He did not yet know that within minutes, Captain Owen Redding would step out of the cockpit, and with a single command, Malik Carter's fate on this flight would take a turn no one could have imagined. The cockpit door swung open. The sound of leather shoes struck the thick carpet in slow, deliberate rhythm. Captain Owen Redding, silver hair neatly combed, 4 gold stripes on his shoulders, his stride carrying an air of authority, walked straight into the first-class cabin. The space fell silent at once, as though every breath had been caught in his presence. His eyes swept the room before landing on seat 1A. Malik Carter sat upright, gaze calm, but hands clenched slightly on his knees. Across from him, Graham Whitfield allowed a smirk to curl across his face, like a child who had just called for his father to settle an argument. "I've been told there is a seating issue," Redding said, his voice deep and heavy, like a gavel striking down. Malik raised his ticket to eye level with the captain, his voice clear. "There is no issue from my side. This is the seat I booked, seat 1A. Redding glanced at Whitfield, catching the man's expectant nod before turning back to Malik. "Missy, Whitfield is a loyal passenger. He flies this route every week. He has a medical condition that requires a window seat. I am asking you to switch to 2C as an accommodation." The atmosphere shifted uneasily. Some passengers lowered their heads, pretending to read newspapers, while others discreetly lifted their phones to record. Malik could hear his own heartbeat pounding, yet his voice remained steady. "I am also a diamond status passenger. I booked and confirmed this seat in advance. I see no safety reason to move." A thin smile passed over Graham's lips, convinced he had won. But Malik did not yield. Captain Redding's brow furrowed, his tone hardening. "I am the captain. When I ask, it is not a request. It is an order." The cabin froze. Sophie Kramer stood nearby, tray still in her hands, her eyes flickering with unease, but her lips sealed. Graham folded his arms and leaned back, savoring the scene like an audience watching his own play unfold. Malik drew a deep breath. In an instant, memories surged. His father, shackled in a courtroom, his mother's vacant stare in the courthouse hallway, the years he had bowed his head, enduring suspicious looks to avoid trouble. But today, here in this cabin under so many eyes, he knew he could not bow his head again. Malik spoke slowly, each word dropping heavy as stone into a still lake. I respect your authority over the safety of this flight, but this is not about safety. This is about fairness, and I will remain in the seat I paid for, the seat I was assigned. A silence fell. Then Redding leaned closer, his words clipped and sharp. If you refuse, I will consider you a disruptive passenger, and you will be removed from this aircraft. The tension snapped like a wire. A few passengers gasped softly. The sound of phone cameras recording filled the air, dozens of digital eyes fixed on the standoff. Malik lifted his chin, his gaze unwavering. If that is your choice, then everyone here will witness it. I have done nothing wrong. I am simply sitting in my seat. In that moment, seat 1A was no longer just a place to sit. It became a battleground. On one side, entrenched privilege and arrogance. On the other, dignity, resolve, and the weight of an entire life spent being denied. And the real fight had only just begun. The air in the first-class cabin grew so heavy it was hard for anyone to breathe. Captain Owen Redding stood tall, his voice booming like a final judgment. Mr. Carter, this is your last chance. If you do not move, I will have to call airport security. Whispers rippled through the cabin like waves. A few passengers pretended to look down at their newspapers, but their hands trembled as they pressed record on their phones. Invisible lenses captured every gesture, every breath of this moment. Malik sat still, his back pressed into the soft leather seat, but inside he burned with fire. He remembered his father, wrongfully convicted simply for daring to resist. He remembered his mother's weary eyes, and all the times bank employees stared at him like a stranger when he withdrew money from his own account. How many times had he chosen silence just to avoid trouble? But today, under the watch of so many eyes, he knew he could not stay silent. He raised his head, his voice calm, yet unyielding. I am not being disruptive. I am sitting in the seat I booked and paid for. If you call security, everyone here will see the truth. That a passenger, following every rule, is being treated unjustly just to please someone else. His words cut through the silence like a blade. A few passengers nodded slightly. A young woman across the aisle discreetly raised her thumb in support. But Graham Whitfield ground his teeth, his face red with fury. This is ridiculous, Graham snarled, loud enough for the whole cabin. I fly this route every week. Everyone knows 1A is mine. What does a newcomer like him know about seating here? The words "a newcomer like him" rang out, exposing the contempt hidden behind his eyes. Sophie Kramer, the lead flight attendant, stood frozen between the two forces, her gaze darting nervously, waiting for the captain's cue. Redding lifted his hand, his voice cold as ice. Call security. Sophie hesitated, then bowed her head and picked up the intercom. Her voice came soft but clear. We need assistance in first class. A passenger is not complying with instructions. Malik's heart pounded, but his face remained unmoved, carved in stone. In that moment, He heard seats shifting, saw more phones lifted higher, their cameras aimed straight at him. The entire cabin had become a stage, and he, the unwilling main character. Minutes later, 3 security officers in black uniforms stepped in. Their shoes struck the floor in firm, deliberate rhythm. The passengers held their breath. Malik clenched his fists, blood rushing to his temples. "Sir," one officer said, his tone both rigid and uneasy, "please gather your belongings and come with us." "May I ask why?" Malik replied, his eyes steady, glowing with calm defiance. "I have not violated any regulation. I am simply sitting in the seat assigned to me." The lead officer glanced at Redding. The captain gave a single nod. That was all it took to transform a rightful passenger into a disruptive threat in the eyes of aviation law. In that fleeting instant, Malik understood. This was not about a seat. This was a test of whether he had the courage to stand against injustice, even knowing the outcome would be harsh. He drew a deep breath, his voice resonant enough for all to hear. "You can take me off this plane. But remember, this truth is being recorded, and it will not disappear when I step off." A shiver ran through the first-class cabin. Graham's face blanched for a moment, while Redding clenched his jaw, straining to maintain authority. But Malik, surrounded by security, no longer felt alone. His dignity and the eyes of dozens of witnesses had turned Seat 1A into an undeniable symbol. The thud of boots on the floor grew heavier with each step. 3 security officers closed in, surrounding Seat 1A. Phones rose higher, screens glowing like electronic eyes, ready to expose every move in the cabin. "Sir, this is your last chance," the lead officer barked, his hand hovering near the steel cuffs. Malik Carter lifted his chin slightly, his voice calm, resonant, and frighteningly steady. "I am not resisting. I will leave the plane. But there has been nothing disruptive here. You are removing a diamond passenger simply because another man wanted to take my seat." His words poured into the tense air, drawing sharp breaths from some passengers and nods of agreement from others. But Captain Redding stood cold, with his arms folded, his gaze like ice, while Graham Whitfield smirked with triumph, as if victory were already his. A heavy hand clamped around Malik's arm, squeezing harder than necessary. He rose, his leather briefcase still tucked neatly beneath the seat. "There's no need to use force. I can walk on my own," Malik said, his voice still composed. But security would not let him leave quietly. One shoved his shoulder, another locked his arm in a grip. In the chaos, Malik stumbled, his forehead striking hard against the cabin wall. A hollow thud echoed, and a fresh streak of red trickled from his brow, seeping down to the edge of his lips. Gasps filled the air. A woman clutched her mouth in shock. A young student swung his phone closer, capturing the blood dripping onto Malik's pristine white collar. "Oh my God, they made him bleed!" a passenger cried. Malik did not resist. He simply kept his back straight, taking each forced step, his is sweeping across the cabin. That gaze carried pain and humiliation, but also the simmering fire of a man who swore he would never let this moment be forgotten. As he was dragged down the aisle, some passengers whispered shame, while others sat frozen in silence. Graham Whitfield leaned back in seat 2C, a satisfied grin spreading across his face like a victor clutching stolen spoils. Drops of blood fell from Malik's lips, one by one staining the carpet behind him. Those crimson marks carved the story into the memory of everyone present. This was no longer about a seat. It was living proof of a hidden prejudice laid bare. When the cabin door swung open, Malik was escorted down the jet bridge. Phones clicked in rapid bursts with every step, recording every second. In that moment, he knew the humiliation would not end on the runway. It would spread outward, onto social media, into the press, into the minds of millions. He turned his head once, blood still streaking his lips, his voice carrying like an oath. "You can take me off this plane, but you will not silence the truth." The cabin door shut behind him, and from that moment, the storm had only just begun. The metal door slammed shut behind him, leaving Malik Carter inside a cramped holding room. The cold fluorescent light above cast a pale glow across his face, making him look even more drained. An officer tossed a box of tissues onto the table. "Wipe the blood. Someone will take your statement later." Malik picked up a tissue, pressed it gently to his mouth, soaking up the red stains spreading across his white shirt. The physical pain was nothing, but the humiliation of being dragged out like a criminal in front of dozens of people burned all the way to his bones. He sat still, eyes fixed on the faint red blotches on the tissue. Then a vibration from his pocket jolted him upright. His phone. They had taken his luggage, but somehow missed it. The screen flashed non-stop. 27 missed calls, hundreds of messages. Social media notifications poured in like a tidal wave. A video had already been posted. The headline screamed, "Black executive dragged from seat 1A to make room for white passenger." The clip lasted less than 2 minutes, but it was enough to ignite a firestorm. Malik sat calmly, showing his ticket. The captain scowled. His voice was clear. "I'm sitting in the seat I booked." Then came the moment security grabbed his arm, the sickening thud of his head striking the cabin wall, the streak of blood sliding down onto his shirt. Within an hour, the video had 2 million views. Within 2 hours, it had spread across every platform: Twitter, TikTok, Facebook. The hashtag #Seat1A shot to the top of national trends. Out there, in lit apartments and buzzing offices, people were passing the clip around. Some were furious, some heartbroken, others silent but unable to look away. A storm of public outrage was forming, and Malik Carter was at its eye. His phone rang again. He answered, his voice shaking not from pain, but from fury held in check. It was Elena Brooks, his trusted aide. "Malik? My God, are you okay? I just saw the video. Your mouth, the blood." "I'm fine," Malik said, though each heartbeat sent a sting through the cut. "What's the situation?" "Bad, but also an opportunity. NetSecure just called. They've postponed the meeting because of the uproar. But they're furious with the airline. The media is exploding. The hashtag #Seat1A is everywhere. People are calling for a boycott of Skybridge Airlines." Malik closed his eyes, drawing in a long breath. He knew it had gone far beyond a seat. This was now a public battle, where justice no longer wore a judge's robe, but lived in viral clips and surging hashtags. "Call Arthur Dean," Malik said, his voice low but firm. "I want our legal team ready for a major civil rights lawsuit. And call Victor Hale. I want to know exactly what Skybridge Airlines has been hiding." On the line, Elena's voice was steady. "I'll take care of it. You're not alone in this, Malik. They picked the wrong man." Malik allowed himself a faint smile, though the split in his lip turned it into a streak of pain. He looked up at the harsh light overhead, its glare reflected in his eyes. Bound by false rules, he still held on to one unshakable belief. Seat 1A was never just a seat. It was a symbol of dignity, and he would never allow anyone to erase it. Outside, the tide of outrage swelled like a tsunami, and Malik knew he was about to ride that wave, no matter the cost. That night, the Dallas headquarters of Skybridge Airlines blazed like a burning ship in the dark. Conference hall lights stayed on. Phones rang non-stop. Emails piled sky-high. In just 24 hours, the company's stock had fallen 14%, wiping out hundreds of millions of dollars in value. In the boardroom on the 32nd floor, CEO Nadia Pierce slammed her tablet onto the table. The blood-red graphs on the projection screen reflected across the pale faces of her executives. "How could this happen?" Nadia roared. "A passenger dragged from his seat, blood on his shirt, and the entire world watching." Alan Morris, head of communications, spoke with a trembling voice. "We've released a statement. Safety is our top priority. The passenger was removed for failing to follow instructions. But the public isn't buying it. The video is too clear." Nadia turned to Patricia Winters, the company's legal counsel. "What's the risk of litigation?" Patricia gripped a thick file, her eyes weary. "The risk is enormous. If Mr. Carter files a civil rights lawsuit, especially with video evidence from multiple angles, we could be facing massive damages. Worse, if the passenger comfort profiles system is exposed, this won't just be a lawsuit. It will be a disaster." The room fell silent. Passenger comfort profiles, the secret policy that flagged passengers who might be sensitive to sitting beside Black or Muslim travelers, was a forbidden secret. If revealed, it would be an admission that Skybridge had practiced systemic discrimination. "Who has access to that system?" Nadia demanded, her voice cutting. "IT, operations, and certain senior managers," Patricia answered. "If it leaks, it won't be from outside. It will be an insider." A wave of panic spread across the room. All eyes turned back to the screen, where the video of Malik Carter being dragged replayed endlessly on CNN. At the same time, in Chicago, Malik Carter's penthouse had become a command center. The living room was covered in laptops, phones, and stacks of documents. Arthur Dean, the famed civil rights attorney, sat tall at a dark wooden table, his eyes blazing as he reviewed the latest report. "This is no longer just a case of personal violation," Arthur said, his voice ringing. "This is an opportunity to expose a system of discrimination that has existed in the airline industry for decades." Elena Brooks scanned the Twitter feed rapidly, her voice urgent. The hashtag #MustSeat1NA has surpassed 10 million mentions. Celebrities, politicians, civil rights groups, everyone is speaking out. People are demanding a full investigation into Skybridge. Malik leaned back, the split in his lip still stinging, but his eyes shone with fire. We're not just fighting for justice for me. We're setting a precedent, so that anyone who was ever told they don't belong can see themselves in this fight. Arthur nodded, then opened a new file. An internal whistleblower has reached out. There are employees at Skybridge willing to testify. They say there are training documents about managing passengers to ensure comfort for long-term customers. Elena drew a sharp breath, her hand trembling. If that's true, this is a nuclear bomb. Malik rose and walked to the window, gazing out over Chicago's lights, glittering like a sea of stars. Inside him, pain had already given way to iron resolve. They thought I was just another passenger. They underestimated me. But now, they will face not just me, but an entire movement. In that moment, Malik's face was carved in shadow and light. A man who had once been dragged from his seat, now preparing to drag an entire corporation into the light. The next afternoon, a hastily arranged meeting took place in a discreet conference room in downtown Chicago. The walls were lined with soundproof glass, and a long, polished walnut table stretched between the two sides. They did not sit as airline and passenger, but as two opposing forces in battle. On behalf of Skybridge Airlines, Patricia Winters, legal counsel, flanked by 3 uniformed grey, suited lawyers, their faces cold as stone. Across from them, Arthur Dean, renowned civil rights attorney, and Malik Carter, his lip still split and marked with dried blood, but his eyes glowing with a quiet fire. Patricia opened her laptop, her voice flat without a trace of emotion. Mr. Carter, Skybridge Airlines sincerely apologizes for the unfortunate incident on your flight. As a gesture of goodwill, the company is prepared to offer compensation, $7 million. In return, you will sign a strict confidentiality agreement and drop all claims. The number dropped onto the table like a weight. One of Skybridge's lawyers allowed a small smile, certain that the man who had been dragged off a plane would leap at the chance. Malik stared straight ahead, unblinking. His voice was hoarse, but every word was sharp. $7 million in exchange for dignity, in exchange for silence in the face of truth. Arthur leaned forward, his tone slow and deliberate. My client is not concerned with numbers. He is concerned with justice. The air grew thick. Patricia kept her calm expression, but her fingers tapped lightly against the table, the rhythm quickening. We can raise it to $10 million. This is our final offer. Malik laughed, short and dry. You want me to sign a gag order while the entire world is watching a video of my blood on a white shirt? Do you really believe money can bury the truth? Patricia's lips tightened, her professional smile cracking. Mr. Carter, be realistic. A drawn-out lawsuit will be costly, exhausting. Your company's reputation will also be dragged into it. Are you certain you want to go that far? Malik leaned forward, bracing his hands on the table, his gaze cutting across the space. I have spent years building my reputation. I am not afraid to risk it, if it means real change. What I want is not money. I want an independent investigation, full disclosure of all passenger comfort profiles data, and systemic reform under the oversight of civil rights organizations. All 4 Skybridge lawyers stiffened, their faces tightening. One shot up from his chair, nearly shouting, "That is unacceptable!" Patricia raised her hand, signaling him to sit, though her face had gone pale. "You are demanding the impossible." Malik rose, straightened his tie, his voice dropping low. "No. I am demanding what is necessary. If you refuse to change, then we will see each other in court." He turned and walked out, Arthur rising with him. The conference room door slammed shut, leaving behind a suffocating silence. Patricia sat frozen, her hand resting on the unsigned agreement. Outside, the media storm roared. Inside, they had just realized Skybridge was not facing a passenger. They were facing a man determined to drag an entire corporation into the light. That evening, when Malik Carter returned to his penthouse, the living room was already crowded. Not only was Arthur Dean's team of lawyers there, but new faces had also joined, tense, determined, and unyielding. A woman in a flight attendant's uniform sat tucked into the corner of the sofa, her hands tightly clasped. The name tag had been removed from her chest, but everyone recognized her as Sophie Kramer, the lead attendant of the first-class cabin on that fateful flight. The room fell silent. Malik looked at her, his eyes no longer cold as they had been on the plane, but carrying a mix of regret and fear. Sophie spoke, her voice trembling but clear. I cannot stay silent any longer. What happened to you that day was not an accident. It was part of a hidden policy we were forced to follow. Passenger comfort profiles, we were trained to make sure sensitive passengers sat exactly where they wanted, even if it meant removing someone else. Arthur leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "You are willing to testify?" Sophie nodded, her hands clenched so tightly her knuckles turned white. "I kept a copy of the training materials. I know this will destroy my career. But I cannot forget seeing you dragged out, blood on your shirt. I knew I was complicit in that injustice." The air grew heavy. Malik slowly stepped closer, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You are not alone. From now on, you will not stand on the sidelines." The doorbell rang. Elena Brooks opened it, revealing a thin man in a white shirt, nearly 40. He introduced himself as Daniel Foster, a former IT staffer at Skybridge. "I was fired last year for protesting the comfort profiles," Daniel said, his eyes sharp as a blade. "But before I left, I copied some of the data. It shows that black passengers were over 20 times more likely to be reassigned seats than white passengers." Arthur shot up from his chair, electrified. "This is the bomb we needed." Malik felt a surge of electricity course through his body. The grotesque pieces of the truth were falling into place. Not just a captain abusing his power, not just an entitled passenger. Behind it all was a system nurtured and protected by fake smiles and hidden policies. Elena looked around the room, her voice steady but resolute. "We are no longer just a small group. This is a movement, and Skybridge cannot smother it with a few $1 million. Malik took a deep breath. In that moment, he realized his story had grown beyond himself. It had become a weapon for everyone who had ever been told they were unworthy of sitting in their rightful place. Then his voice thundered, "We will not just sue. We will rip the veil off this entire industry." The room erupted in applause. Strangers who had once been apart were now bound together by a single purpose: justice. And from that night forward, the fight no longer belonged only to Malik Carter. It had become the fight of everyone. The great hall of the Capitol gleamed under the blaze of television lights. Dozens of reporters crowded in, microphones pointed at the heavy wooden doors. On the electronic board high above, the words glowed. Hearing. Discrimination in commercial aviation. Malik Carter entered. His dark blue suit cut a sharp figure, the small scar still etched on his lip, a mark that could not be erased. At his side was Arthur Dean, the steely face of a legal warrior, and behind them sat rows packed with supporters of Seat 1A, Sophie Kramer, Daniel Foster, Elena Brooks, and a long list of passengers who had endured injustice. On the opposite bench, CEO Nadia Pierce sat upright. Her golden hair was brushed smooth. A thin smile stretched across her tense face. Beside her, a phalanx of lawyers shifted nervously, their eyes flicking toward the posters outside. Dignity first. Justice for Seat 1A. A gavel struck sharply. Congresswoman Carla Montrose, chair of the committee, declared firmly, "The hearing is now in session. Today, we will hear testimony from Dr. Malik Carter, the central witness in the case that has shaken the nation." Malik nodded, stepped up to the microphone, and drew a long breath. His eyes swept the room, full of expectant stares. "Madam Chair, esteemed members, I am not here to tell the story of a seat being taken. I am here to speak about dignity. Seat 1A is just the tip of the iceberg. Behind it lies a system built on catering to certain passengers at the cost of humiliating others." Cameras clicked in rapid fire. Malik continued, his voice low but resonant. "I was dragged from my seat, blood staining my white shirt, simply because I refused to give it up to a so-called sensitive passenger. But the data provided by Daniel Foster shows this was no isolated incident. It was policy. Black passengers were reassigned at more than 20 times the rate of white passengers. This was systemic discrimination, disguised under the word service. A ripple of shock spread through the chamber. Live broadcasts zoomed in on Nadia Pierce's face. She tried to hold steady, but her hands clenched the table edge. Sophie Kramer rose when called. Her voice trembled, yet carried conviction. "I enforced those directives. I watched colleagues disciplined for refusing. Today, I stand here to say the truth. Skybridge turned us into instruments to preserve the comfort of a few, at the expense of fairness for everyone else." The chamber froze in disbelief. Carla Montrose leaned into her microphone. Her tone weighted. "Mrs. Pierce, do you have a response to this evidence?" Nadia inhaled, forcing a thin smile. Skybridge has never, officially, authorized any policy rooted in racial discrimination. This was a misunderstanding in procedure. At that moment, Arthur Dean lifted a folder high. An email from Captain Redding, 6 months before the incident. It reads, verbatim, "We are forced to implement the passenger harmony protocol, even though we know it is discriminatory and carries high legal risk." The room erupted. Reporters surged forward toward the screens displaying the enlarged email. Nadia went pale, her head dropping as a wave of outrage swept through the chamber. Malik stood once more, closing his testimony with a voice choked, yet unshaken. "This is not about me. This is about everyone who has ever been deemed unworthy. Today, I call on Congress not only to investigate, but to compel the entire aviation industry to reform so that no one ever again must trade their dignity for a seat. Applause thundered. Rows of spectators rose to their feet. Seat 1A had transcended the confines of a single flight. It had become the symbol of a movement, a reminder that sometimes all it takes is one person refusing to move for the system itself to be forced to change. As the hearing drew to a close, the world's media was still ablaze. From Washington to New York, from Chicago to Los Angeles, the phrase Seat 1A was no longer just a hashtag, but a symbol of resistance, of dignity, and of a larger question. Who truly has the right to sit in their rightful place in this society? In the days that followed, Congress introduced a bill to reform the aviation industry. Skybridge Airlines was forced to release all of its data, dismantle the comfort profiles system, and sign a binding agreement to reform under independent oversight. Other airlines, facing mounting public pressure, also began to change. Malik Carter did not become a hero because he was wealthy or because his company was worth billions. He became a symbol because he chose not to rise from Seat 1A. That seemingly small choice became the spark that ignited an entire movement, and the message echoed far beyond the cabin of a single flight, that power is not always money or status, but sometimes the ability to say enough at the right moment, that staying silent to protect yourself may spare you from confrontation, but it will never save a system already rotting from within, and that justice is not a gift bestowed, but the result of steadfastness that refuses to back down. Looking back, Malik understood. The blood stain on his white shirt that day was not just a mark of violence. It was a crimson seal stamped into history, a reminder that sometimes one person quietly holding their seat can force not just a corporation, but an entire industry to change. And what about you? If you were in Malik Carter's Seat 1A, would you bow your head in silence or stand firm to protect your dignity? Leave a comment with 3 words: dignity first. And do not forget to like and subscribe to join us in telling more stories where a single small decision can shake the entire world.